Welcome back to another episode of the Chasing Elephants podcast, where we're just trying to keep it real. we're just trying to represent. I'm sorry, folks. Hey, I apologize. I'm going to get canceled for that. I know.
Man, listen.
But I just watched a clip from an old movie with Jeff.
Yes, he did. That statement is 50% accurate.
You ain't keeping it real.
You ain't got some other kind of drink here.
No.
Oh, man. I tell you, family, it is a lot of great conversations that we have before we podcast. It is some good stuff, man. We just talk about the goodness of the Lord.
Yes, you know? And the way movies used to be made in the 1990s.
Oh, man.
Which were funnier.
They were funnier. They were realer.
And they were real. They were
realer. They were real. They kept it real. Realer isn't a word. They were more real. Sorry. We're educated. We're educated individuals.
Thank you for that. Thank you for that. Well, man, we're coming off of Youth Pastor Summit.
Oh, yes.
We've done a run. Served literally thousands
we
of youth workers across the country.
It's been
amazing.
Yeah.
You've done a phenomenal job in helping to lead that and guide, shepherd that.
Thank you, man.
But really been some great moments. But one of the things we had to do, because we were running so hard, is we had to take a break from our series where we're talking about the most excuse me, let me back up, because I do know how to talk. The 7 most common struggles for a leader. And we've already kind of done part 1 and part 2.
Yeah.
And then, so we wanted to pick back up with that series.
Yeah.
I know for me, as soon as that first one dropped, I heard from quite a few of our youth workers and pastors like, this is pretty helpful. This is really practical. It's very helpful.
Yeah. And to that youth leader that tackled me in Nashville and asked, when were we picking it back up? This is for you. We were thinking about taking a break, but
part 3. Nope.
Getting back to work. You tackled me in the hallway there. It was
we landed last night at almost midnight, and here we are the next day.
We are right now. And so, but yeah, man, it's been a great conversation. And what we've talked about, Brent, is how really for all of us, we can see ourselves. Yeah. If we're being honest, I think one of the most important attributes of a leader that they should have is that they're keeping it real. I'm saying keeping it real, but they're honest with themselves about, hey, here are some potential blind spots that I may have as a leader, and how do I acknowledge them, number 1, but also course correct, number 2. And so I love this conversation that we have. And now the one we're going to talk about today, bro. Ooh. Now this one, I'm curious to hear from our audience and our listeners once they hear this, because this one I would go on a limb to say not many people talk about. Yeah. Because we when we hear some of the attributes we're going to define this particular leader, some people say, well, what's wrong with that? You know? And but how many of you know too much of a good thing can be a bad thing? Yeah. That's right. And so So
we're talking about this week the overconfident leader.
The overconfident. And
so let's distinguish, first of all, there's a Grand Canyon difference between confidence and overconfidence.
Yes.
Paul said in Romans 14:5, let each man be convinced in his own mind. To me, that's the definition of confidence.
Yes.
You are convinced, whatever it is, whether it's your theology or your core convictions or what you value in your organization or what your mission is and vision is for your leadership, but you're convinced. Yeah. That's confidence.
Right.
Overconfidence is... Well, here's how I'll explain it. I love movies. I do, which is why we were laughing when we got on, because we were talking about a silly comedy from the 1990s that probably would never get aired today.
Not today, no sir.
But there's a movie that came out in 2010. It was Ridley Scott's version of Robin Hood, and it was the backstory.
Okay.
And it picked up with Robin Hood when he was serving in the Crusades as an archer, and it was the Russell Crowe version. And then they ended up kind of ending the movie with going to battle where France is trying to invade England, and they were going to stop that. Yeah. So, and then I think they wanted to end up doing part 2, and it never happened. But that movie, really good movie. But there's a scene in the movie where they're going to defend England against France. France is trying to do this naval invasion on the beaches there in England, and the king, who was a young king, who had never led anything before, is there in his robe on his horse with his crown, and he's all excited that they're going to war for the first time.
Yeah.
And he looks at all the seasoned generals.
Yeah, yeah.
And he said this to them, "Gentlemen, we go to war. It is my first time. I shall lead."
Right?
And you go, what in the name of Zeus is this cat thinking?
Yeah.
Right? It's my first time. I've never done this before. So follow me.
I will lead the charge.
Yeah.
You know,
that's overconfident.
Yeah. You got to respect, the oomph within him to say that with such confidence and certainty that here you are inexperienced.
Yep.
You've never done this, but you're going to step to the plate and you shall lead. And I can imagine the people who, the soldiers who are listening to that leader say that, I don't know, I'm going to charge maybe in the other direction. Yeah. And so.
Well, that's how he ended up becoming the King John that we know from Robin Hood legends.
Yeah.
Is that there was this overconfidence and total lack of self-awareness.
Yeah.
And I think that's the key, right?
That's the
confidence is I'm convinced in my own mind. Overconfidence is I'm so convinced that I'm not even self-aware.
Yeah. And when there's a lack of self-awareness that leads to a place where you don't know how to handle or you don't see the blind spots in your own leadership.
Yep.
And so one of the things I love, you always talk about, we talk about things that define it. We talk about define. So if you were to define, Brent, kind of like that overconfident leader, I know what you shared here in that story, but that overconfident leader, how would you kind of like pinpoint a definition of like, okay, I know these are some characteristics, but if you were to give a simplified definition, how would you define one?
Oh, I would say an overconfident leader is a delusional leader. They're somebody who
That's a good word. Delusional.
They have tricked themselves into thinking that they're something they're not.
Yeah.
And so that's why I say the difference between confidence and overconfidence has to do with self-awareness.
Yeah.
Self-awareness can be a superpower.
Yeah.
It really can. And what I've found in the leadership journey, Jeff, and I'm 46 years old. There's a lot I have left to learn. I have a long way left to go. But what I'm finding is that it is harder to stay self-aware the older you get. I don't know if it's because we get more confident in our gifting and our skill sets. And you know what I mean? But there's this thing about getting older and being self-aware. And the truth is, if you can condition your leadership journey and mind and the way your mindset is to be always to grow in self-awareness the older you get, I think you position yourself as a leader to be much more influential in a healthy way.
Yeah, and I think it also means that you have to have just this humble posture and mindset to be open for a couple things. One, accountability, and then two, for feedback.
Yeah.
Because when we lack accountability, we lack having people in our lives to give us feedback and constructive criticism, then we stay in that place of being overconfident because we see ourselves this delusional, to your point, superior type of leader who celebrates the victories, which you should, but thinks that there's no room for improvement in your leadership style or your journey.
So let's turn to the scriptures now.
Okay.
Jesus dealt with this overconfidence, cockiness, prideful, posturing, if you will, in Matthew chapter 6. And I'm just going to read just a few verses here if I can to and then take Jesus' words and let him guide us in how to. There's a principle to learn here. There's an idea to kind of guide us as we move forward. There's a cautionary tale here as well. Yeah. But Jesus said in Matthew 6:1, "Be careful not to practice your righteousness in front of others to be seen by them." Right? I mean, like, is righteousness correct? Yes,
it is.
I'm confident if I know what is righteous and to practice it. But if I'm practicing it in front of others, then I lack self-awareness.
Yeah.
I'm overconfident.
Right.
I'm delusional at that point. He goes on, "Otherwise, you have no reward with your Father in heaven. So whenever you give to the poor, do not sound a trumpet before you, as the hypocrites do in the synagogues and on the streets, to be applauded by the people. Truly, I tell you, they have their reward. But when you give to the poor, don't let your left hand know what your right hand is doing." Of course, that was a common proverb of the day on how to guard your heart and your mind in such a way that you remain humble in spirit. Verse 4, he says, so that your giving can be done in secret, and your Father who sees in secret will reward you. And he really transitions here, and he's going to provide the model prayer, that great text, but he actually uses prayer as a further example for how not to be that guy that parades and is no self-awareness and look at me and right. And he goes on when he says, whenever you pray, you must be not be like the hypocrites. Because they love to pray standing in the synagogues and on the street corners. Why? To be seen by people. Truly, again, they get the same reward. Truly, I tell you, they have their reward. When you pray, go into your private room, shut your door, and talk to your Father who is in secret. And it continues on and then transitions to the model prayer. And so
love that.
I want us to kind of walk through what because I think the remedy for an overconfident leader, and let's just be really honest. Jeff, all of us are going to get out over our skis at some point.
Right. Absolutely.
So when that happens, here's the remedy. Let's go to the words of Jesus. It's the medicine for my soul. So that I can be confident, but not overconfident. And so I'd start off with this. I think there's a principle that speaks to our motivation in this text. Motivation is obviously front and center in this text. And that principle is those who parade their works for the praise of others do not love like Jesus.
Yeah, man. It is those who care about the attaboys, the adoration or the praise of many, instead of positioning yourself to have those intimate moments where you can hear from the one, the true and living God. And I think that's why Jesus, when he's talking about this text, or he's sharing this in this text in Matthew chapter 6, and he goes into that model prayer, it is to remind us, hey, it is about developing this deep, intimate relationship with your Father. And here's the thing, in my prayer closet, when it's just me and God, no one sees me there, and it's not about that. But if I am out in the synagogues making a spectacle, for the crowd to see, as if their views and opinions of my level of spirituality is more important than having a true relationship with God. I think Jesus is reminding us of that. What's your motivation? Like, is there this fleshly desire for people to celebrate you, to compliment you? And let's be honest, Brent, we all enjoy the compliments of
course
of
I have to guard my mind against it. Like I try to dismiss it. Sometimes I can go too far with it. I can be very negative towards myself. But like there is a healthy fear, I think, that needs to exist in us to go, man, I don't I don't want to believe the praise, because if I do, I'm going to believe the criticism way too much.
And that's the part. And the part is when you talk about that motivation, it is like, man, what is my motivation for this moment? Am I wanting to be seen by many, or do I want to live out the calling from what the Lord thy God has placed on our lives? One
of my favorite authors at a certain time in history, he was a contemporary of a guy named Charles Haddon Spurgeon, who a lot of pastors love to read and quote. What's funny is I've heard Spurgeon quoted from, like, he's one of those guys that whether you're charismatic or whether you're not charismatic, whether you're Baptist or Methodist or like, it's funny. Even this season at YPS, I've heard Levi Lusko, Pastor Derwin Gray, it's
Eugene
across
Cho,
the Eugene Cho. I've had all the guys quote Spurgeon, and I went, there was something about that guy. One of the contemporaries of Spurgeon was another pastor who was not known as much as a pulpiteer as Spurgeon, but he was much better with the pen. And it was a guy named J.C. Ryle. And Ryle was an incredible author. Ryle wrote a book that impacted my life greatly called Holiness. Great book. I've encouraged a lot of young men and women that I've had the privilege of discipling to read that book. But Ryle said about this, he said this about this text when reflecting on those who really parade their good works for the praise of others. He said this, and this is just a piercing quote for me. How many are rich towards themselves, but poor towards God? That's a powerful that's a powerful way of saying it.
And I mean, and so what are we asking, when you think about this motivation, it's like, what is your inner why? Whatever you're doing, the praying, the preaching, the teaching, the leading. What is your inner why? What's your inner motivation? What do we say here in our shop at Student Leadership University? We say leadership begins where? At the feet of Jesus. And I think that is not just a slogan that we say, Brent, but it is a lifestyle that we are trying to employ upon our students, to impress upon our students, to really live out in their everyday life. It's like, man, my inner wise, I want to please Jesus, and I want to make him known to others. My light, if I want my light to shine in darkness, is not I'm trying to point the spotlight on me. I want my light to shine so I can point people to Jesus. And earlier on in the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus talks about that, in Matthew chapter 5 and 16, he talks about being salt and light, and how, we shouldn't put our lampshade over our light, but, we need to let our light shine. And in the light, should be like, we should be a light on the top of a hill, man, so that people, that whole idea of when these lamps or these lights were on the stands in these homes, and they were the city that was on the hill, what was the purpose of that? Was to provide direction, for people. And our job as ministers of the gospel, or leaders who are leading under the banner of the gospel, man, we should always be pointing people to Jesus. And the point that we point people to ourselves, that's a problem.
And that's because a lot of scholars will go, well, Jesus in this same sermon, in the text you just referenced, which is Matthew 5:13 through 16, that text ends with, so that they may see your good works. What? But I think isn't he telling us that they shouldn't see our good works? No. He goes, they shouldn't really, what he's teaching us is, no, you shouldn't do good works so that you will be praised.
Right.
Because if you do good works rightly, what is the end of that text? So that they will see your good works and glorify your Father in heaven.
Yeah.
So really the caution here, the principle here is that if you don't love like Jesus loves, then you're going to seek the wrong kind of attention and praise. And it really leads to a caution or a warning about a sinful practice. We'll call it self-promotion, the sinful practice of self-promotion. And here's the cautionary kind of principle or tale that I take away from this text, because he really is clear. He says it twice. Your reward is not in heaven.
Yeah.
If the end goal of your life is the praise of men, then your reward is, the Father's reward is not your reward.
You're getting your reward here on earth.
So when the applause of others is your purpose, then heaven probably isn't your home.
And many times you see him reference the word hypocrites. I mean, it is hypocritical for us to say.
That's how he describes somebody who's constantly the practice of self-promotion. They're just a hypocrite.
Yeah, and I think that again reinforces when we talk about when you check your motivation at the door, then the byproduct of that is I'm not. It's not about self-promotion. When I acknowledge is that I'm trying to point people to Jesus, then my posture should be, that of a humble posture, and not of that where I'm trying to I'm trying to uplift myself or exalt myself or promote myself. And I love that phrase, that when the applause of others is your purpose,
heaven probably isn't your home.
That's I don't want to gloss over that. I think that's so important to speak to the cautionary tale of, we have to be very, very careful, and we have to govern ourselves accordingly. Very, very careful not to be that overconfident leader. Who's leading out of their flesh.
If the praise of others is the medicine you seek for your soul, then you're just poisoning yourself. And I think that's kind of what's happening here. There's some examples in this text of people who are literally practicing righteousness or a spiritual discipline like prayer for the purpose of being seen or heard, so that they can receive praise, thinking that somehow is going to satisfy their soul. And really, at the end of the day, all they're doing is poisoning themselves.
Are you a follower of Jesus, or are you a leader who's leading like a Pharisee?
And he's going, you're a hypocrite if you're not. And this word hypocrite, obviously, it's a word. I think you could use the word pretender there. A lot of times it would have to do with somebody who's an actor or who was playing a part. That's the most common way that this word is used. But he says, as hypocrites, don't sound a trumpet before you in the synagogues and the streets to be applauded like men. So there's a progression in this text, Jeff, that I want us to see. That the hypocrites, or the pretenders, those who aren't who aren't authentic in their faith. They place their confidence in the wrong thing. They're delusional. They're overconfident.
Yeah.
So the pretenders who make a lot of noise, they sound a trumpet. They want to be seen. The pretenders who make a lot of noise in all the right places to self-promote receive the most attention. And so there is a logical path here. Well, if I do these things, I'm a pretender who self-promotes in all the right places.
Yeah.
Boy, that sounds a lot like today in leadership.
Yeah, because
a lot of people trying to be in all the right network, just the right way, be in all the right, just to be
Everybody
heard,
wanna be
just
an
to
influencer.
Right.
You know.
But he's going. Yeah, the pathway is very clear, but the designation of that path is very dangerous.
Yeah. And we've talked about this, Brent, together just as accountability brothers, but we've also had to mentor other leaders who've given into this. But you know, in a very real practical sense, we've seen a lot of leaders who get intoxicated with the glitz and the glamour of the stage.
Yep.
And we have to be very, very careful as leaders not to allow that intoxication of being on the stage. And
you and I see it all the time.
Yeah,
and I have to guard my heart against it
same,
too.
absolutely.
But
same.
I see it, because we are responsible for a lot of programs and events. There's always people going, I want to. They're saying it in different ways.
Yeah.
They're saying, I had a guy say to me one day, "Hey man, just tell me when. Put me in, coach. I'm ready whenever you want me to."
Yeah.
And I went. The problem is, you think that's the game. You think the whole thing is that.
That's the game. Yeah, or that's the goal.
That's the goal.
Yeah,
and that's not the end goal.
That's not the end goal.
First of all, preaching is not the end goal.
Right.
If anything is the end goal out of what we do on stage, it's worship.
It's worship.
And so it's a dangerous path to walk down, and so many do. I love the way Eugene Peterson's message puts it. He says, "Playing to the crowds, they get applause. True. But that's all they get." Peterson just had a kind of a poetic, matter-of-fact way about him.
And you're wasting your life, Brent, because, you know, again, if eternity in heaven is the ultimate end game and the goal, then as pilgrims who are wandering on this side of heaven, on a journey, on a pilgrimage, then our life, every aspect of our life should reflect that of a pilgrim who's on this journey heading to the heaven country. And so we have to be careful not to allow our flesh to hijack the journey. And that's what happens when we become this overconfident leader, is we give into the flesh. We walk by the flesh and not by the spirit, and it hijacks the journey.
And so what does Jesus do to help us guard our own hearts against this delusional overconfidence in what we can do? And he goes, let me give you a very practical proverb about humility. And he says, so don't let your right hand know what your left hand is doing, or don't let your left hand know what your right hand is doing. So it's this proverb about humble service. What's the point of it? It really is to teach us that we are to love in such a way where there is no temptation for glory or praise. Doesn't mean you won't get praise. Somebody's going to tell you did a good job if you do a good job. But to love in such a way where you're not posturing to get that. To make sure that the end goal of your love is not you. The end goal of your service is not glory. The end goal of everything about your leadership journey is not so that people will go, man,
that was
go
awesome.
Write a book about how you did that. I mean, just what jive that
Yeah.
is. So he gives this little proverb,
So
if you
good.
will, which encompasses both a method. Do not let your right hand know what your left hand is doing. It's a type of saying. Certainly, it's jam packed full of hyperbole, and it's intended to emphasize secrecy. But secrecy is the opposite of giving in a manner that sounds like trumpets sounding to draw attention into one's action. So, in short, Jesus is describing that the overconfident, unhealthy leader, he's describing it using hyperbole, and he goes, this contradicts such activities as like when I say do something in secret, that's in contradicting to sounding the trumpets, right? He's saying be the opposite of that.
Yeah.
Be the opposite of the glory hog.
Yeah.
Be the opposite of the person that postures.
Yeah.
Be the opposite of the person that's going to post every good thing somebody said about them.
Yeah.
Be the opposite of the person that wants to go, I just accomplished this.
Yeah.
Let me post it on social media so everybody can give me a thumbs up or a heart.
Right.
I mean, it's just insanity.
Yeah.
It's craziness. And this method that he's given us about, hey, really it's about humility and compartmentalization is based on a motivation that your giving may be done in secret. Healthy living, healthy loving, healthy leadership efforts begin with the hidden thoughts of our hearts captivated and aligned with the grace and activity of God.
Yeah.
And so that's what that... maybe I'm wrong, Jim, but I think that's what that Proverb's getting at.
That is. And it's like what we've been talking about, man, from Lift Tour and Youth Pastor Summer. We had this whole theme of inverse, living countercultural and going against culture. What culture and society says is, how the more clicks and likes you get, it defines you as a leader, an influencer, and even as a human being or as a person. But no, man, the more I have a deep, intimate relationship with God, man, that's when I'm winning. And stuff. So.
But then the flip side of the coin is, what God sees in secret, He rewards in public.
Yes.
And we see that in this text. And then, of course, there's a statement both in the Old and New Testament how God rejects the proud, the prideful, and gives grace to the humble. So let's end on that note. I want to mention, and I'm going to have to look at my paper here to make sure I get it all correct, but Paul David Tripp is an author that I love reading, and his social account's awesome because he gives a lot of the nuggets from his books. But he wrote an article, it's a blog actually, and it was 7 confessions that foster a humble self-view of our life and journey. And he just wrote these 7 statements down, I statements, if you will. Number 1, I am my biggest problem. Number 2, I can't solve my biggest problem. Number 3, I'm in desperate need of rescue. Number 4, I'm not wired to live well in isolation from others. Number 5, I need the wisdom and experience and insight of others. Number 6, at no time before I cross over into eternity will I ever be, let me say that again, apologize. Number 6, at no time before I cross over into eternity will I ever be a grace graduate. Grace is a school that I will never graduate from. Number 7, I have no room for boasting because every good and perfect gift, everything that's worth celebrating, every blessing, I didn't deserve it. I didn't achieve it. I didn't acquire it on my own. It is the result of God's grace and God's blessing and God's provision in my life. So these are 7 I statements.
I love that.
That I think are helpful in living out that humble proverb that Jesus taught us in Matthew 1.
Man, that's so good. That's so good.
1 through 6.
1 through 6, yes. And I love, man, just as we put a pin here, I love this quote by C.S. Lewis. He talks about the importance of humility and what humility is. And he says, humility is not thinking less of yourself, it's thinking of yourself less.
Yeah.
And I think at the end of the day, we're talking about being an overconfident leader. We're talking about the importance of being humble. And and again, it's not that you don't think that you have the ability or the capacity to lead well and to do things with excellence, but it is saying, hey, I need to also make sure that it's not all about me. But ultimately, it's about Him and making Him known to everybody I come in contact with.
So the question we have to always ask ourselves, so it's like I always like to simplify things down to a question. If I want to guard my mind and my heart against overconfidence, against being delusional, yes, I need to study the Scripture. That's the great remedy. That's the medicine for that my soul needs. But if I were to take all of that and put it into a question, do the work of applied theology and application, if you will, it would be this: am I the humblest version of myself today? That's why I love the 7 I statements from Paul David Tripp. It really gets you to becoming that. You go through all 7, and you really can't help but get to the end of the 7th and go, the whole purpose of this is that I might be the humblest version of myself that I can be today.
Man.
And that's where we want to land. That's where we want to be.
So good. So good. Well, ladies and gentlemen, hey, listen, this has been a great conversation. I hope you've enjoyed. I know, at least for myself, I have. And we're still in the thralls of it, man.
Yeah,
we're
man.
going to pick back up our next episode. We're going to continue to go.
The Higgly Piggly.
Okay, that's just a great teaser. You trust me. You want to listen to the next episode.
The fourth big challenge in the leadership journey.
Because I want to make sure I don't mess it up. I'm just telling you right now, I'm going to have my brother Brent take the lead on this, because I know I'm going to say the word wrong. It's going to sound like something else. And our team loves taking when I mispronounce words. The
Higgly Piggly. You almost sound drunk when you're saying it. The Higgly.
So if you are excited about our next redneck episode, it's not going to be that, but it's going to be good. But hey, seriously, all jokes aside, guys, we'd love for you to do all the things like subscribe, share, all of that great stuff. But as always, you can follow our organization and ministry at SLU Lead. That's at SLU Lead. Follow me at I am Jeff Wallace and my brother Brent
at Brent A. Crowe. Until we meet again, wander well and shine like stars.